My name is Leah Marlowe. I was 18, newly married, and expecting my first child when my parents finally sat across from the farmer they had ordered me to leave home for. The four of us were in a quiet booth at a restaurant neither family used. Mom had chosen neutral ground, but there was nothing neutral about the way Dad studied my husband. Conrad Marlowe could make silence feel like an interview. He kept his jacket buttoned, his phone face down beside his water glass, and his eyes fixed on Gabe's work-roughened hands. Gabe sat close enough that our sleeves touched, but he did not reach for me or answer questions meant for me. That was one of the reasons I had married him. He knew the difference between standing beside me and standing in front of me. Dad leaned back. Before this goes any further, I want your complete legal name. Mom's fingers tightened around her cup. I looked at her, expecting her to object to the interrogation. She lowered her eyes instead. Gabe glanced at me. He had nothing to hide, and we both knew my parents had never asked before. Months earlier, they had decided everything they needed to know after hearing one word about his occupation. What unsettled me now was not merely Dad's question, it was the sudden care with which he was asking it. He had barely asked whether I was healthy, and he had not apologized for making me homeless. Yet he wanted every part of my husband's name, as though the answer might determine whether I was worth reclaiming. Gabe turned back to him and drew a quiet breath. Before I take you back to the night this began, tell me in the comments, when a family offers love only after your life becomes respectable to them, is that reconciliation or another form of control? Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like this video if you believe real family love should survive an uncomfortable truth. To understand why that name mattered, you have to understand who I had been in my parents' house 5 months earlier. I was the daughter who did not create problems. I submitted assignments early, kept my room clean, and knew from the sound of Dad's key in the front door whether he had won or lost whatever argument had occupied his day at Ridge County Bank. If he came home cheerful, Mom served dinner immediately. If he came home quiet, she lowered her voice and expected me to do the same. Dad called that discipline. Mom called it keeping the peace. I called it normal, because I had never lived anywhere else. Dad was a senior commercial lender, and that autumn he was competing for the largest agricultural account his branch had pursued in years. A promotion might follow if he secured it. At dinner, he talked about farm debt, equipment loans, and seasonal payrolls with the authority of someone who believed understanding people's numbers meant understanding their lives. He had already mapped out mine. I would finish high school, attend university, and choose a career he could explain proudly. Pregnancy was not anywhere on that map. Gabe and I had met through a school agricultural service program. He was 19, only 14 months older than I was, and had gone directly into full-time orchard work. He was quiet without being secretive. When he said he would arrive at 6, he arrived 5 minutes early. When I disagreed with him, he listened instead of treating disagreement as disrespect. We had been together long enough to talk about a future, but not long enough to believe we had planned this one. I took the first pregnancy test in a pharmacy restroom after spending a week blaming stress for the nausea. I took the second at home before my parents returned. Both showed the same answer. At the clinic the next afternoon, the nurse confirmed it. I sat in my car afterward with both hands on the steering wheel and felt every future I had imagined rearrange itself. I was terrified of money, school, childbirth, and my parents. I was not uncertain about whether I wanted my baby. When I told Gabe, the color left his face. He sat beside me on a bench outside the clinic and asked the only question that mattered first. "What do you want?" "I want to keep the baby." He nodded once, slowly. "Then we start with that. We figure out everything else without pretending it will be easy." He did not promise a perfect life. He did not claim love could pay a medical bill. He asked about my next appointment, school, and when I planned to tell my parents. That final question made my stomach tighten more than the others. For several weeks I hid beneath loose sweaters while I searched for the right moment. There was always a reason to wait. Dad was preparing a bank presentation, Mom had a foundation event, I had an exam. Each delay made the truth heavier. The decision was finally taken from me during a Sunday dinner. I reached across the table for the water pitcher, and my sweater pulled against the small curve I could no longer flatten. Mom stopped with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Leah," she said, "stand up." The room seemed to contract around me. Dad looked from her face to mine. "Why?" I asked, although I already knew. Mom pushed back her chair. "Please, just stand up." I did. Her hand rose to her lips. Dad did not look shocked for long. His expression hardened before he asked, "Are you pregnant?" "Yes." Mom whispered my name as if I had confessed to a death. Dad's next question came quickly. "Who is the father?" "Gabe, the boy I've been seeing." "What does he do?" "Not whether he loved me. Not whether he knew, not whether I was safe. He's a farmer." Dad's palm struck the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "Abort this cheap baby or get out." For a moment I could hear only the faint ringing of glass against glass. Mom stared at him, and I waited for her to say he had gone too far. Instead, she looked at me. "Your father is frightened. We both are. You still have time to fix this before it ruins everything you've worked for." "Fix it?" My voice came out thin. "You mean end my pregnancy?" "We mean protect your future," she said. Dad remained standing. "You are 17. You have no income, no degree, and apparently the father digs in dirt for a living. I will not finance this disaster or let you parade it through this house." Mom began listing everything I stood to lose. University, the career plan Dad had built, friends who would move forward while I stayed behind. She said each item gently, which somehow made it worse. She never asked what Gabe and I had discussed or whether I had seen a doctor. In her version of my future, motherhood was not difficult. It was disqualifying. The only acceptable plan was the one that restored the daughter they had expected me to be. Every sentence sounded like one of his bank calculations. Income, risk, return. Except he was calculating the value of my child and finding it too low. "You haven't even asked his last name," I said. "His name doesn't change what he is." That sentence stayed with me because months later his name would change everything for Dad. But that night I was still his frightened 17-year-old daughter. I looked at Mom again. "Are you telling me to choose between my baby and my home?" Her eyes filled, but she did not come toward me. "Don't make it sound cruel. We are asking you to think like an adult." "I have thought about it." I rested one hand over the curve beneath my sweater. "I'm keeping my baby." Dad pointed toward the hallway. "Then pack." I waited. Some part of me believed Mom would stop me before I reached my room. She followed, but only as far as the doorway. "Leah, please reconsider," she said while I pulled my blue travel bag from the closet. "Will you let me stay if I don't?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "Your father has made his position clear. I'm asking for yours." She looked toward the hall. That was my answer. I packed 2 changes of clothes, my school laptop, prenatal vitamins, toiletries, and the folder containing my identification. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the charger twice. Mom watched me struggle but never crossed the room to help. The top drawer still held certificates Dad had framed after every academic award. A photograph from my first day of high school stood beside them. Mom and Dad were on either side of me, smiling as if nothing I could do would ever place me outside their arms. I nearly packed the photograph. Then I understood I was reaching for proof of a promise they were breaking in the next room, and I left it where it was. I called Gabe. I managed to tell him only that they knew and that I had to leave. His voice sharpened, but he did not waste time shouting questions. "Stay inside until we get there. Mom's coming with me." Dad was waiting by the front door when I carried the bag downstairs. I removed my house key from its ring and held it out. He stared at my open palm. "This is your last opportunity to make a responsible choice," he said. "I already made one." "Keep it," Mom said quickly. Hope lifted inside me for one foolish second. Dad took the key. "She won't need it unless she changes her mind." Headlights crossed the front window. Gabe's truck stopped at the curb, and Ruth climbed out with him. Dad opened the door before they could knock. "This is a family matter," he said. Ruth looked past him at my bag and then at me. Her face tightened, but her voice stayed level. "Tonight it is a safety matter. We are not here to argue. We are here to make sure Leah has somewhere safe to sleep." Gabe moved toward me, then stopped close enough to help without taking the bag from my hand. "Are you ready?" I looked back at Mom. She was crying silently beside the stairs. I wanted her to say my name in a way that meant come home, not comply. She said nothing. "Yes," I told Gabe. I crossed the threshold with my blue bag pressing against my leg. Dad closed the door before I reached the truck. The porch light remained on behind me, illuminating a house I had entered every day of my life and was no longer permitted to enter as myself. The truck smelled of cold air, engine oil, and the peppermint gum Ruth kept in the console. I sat between my blue bag and the passenger door while Gabe drove. Nobody tried to tell me everything would be fine. Ruth was the first to speak. "How long until you're 18? 5 weeks. Then tomorrow we make sure the school knows where you are, and we find out what paperwork is needed. Your parents don't get to send a minor away and leave everyone else guessing." The word paperwork sounded painfully ordinary after what had happened. I had expected comfort or anger. Ruth offered a list. The farm lay beyond town, past bare orchard rows and low equipment sheds silvered by moonlight. Ruth led me to a small cottage behind the main house. It had once housed seasonal workers, but she had been renovating it for visiting relatives. There was a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a heater that clicked before releasing warm air. "You can sleep here," she said. "Meals are at the house. The bathroom works, but the shower takes a full minute to get hot. We will discuss everything else in daylight." She placed a plain brass key in my palm. I closed my fingers around it and thought about the key Dad had taken. Ruth must have seen something in my face because her voice softened. "This one isn't a reward for agreeing with me. It opens the door. That's all a key should have to do." I cried after they left, quietly at first and then so hard that my ribs hurt. I cried for my room, my mother standing beside the stairs, and the photograph I had left in the drawer. I even cried for Dad, because loving him had not vanished just because I finally understood the conditions attached to his love. At 8 the next morning, Ruth drove me to school. Nina Alvarez, the student support counselor, listened without interrupting while I described the ultimatum. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk. "You are safe for tonight. Now we make sure you stay safe and enrolled." She explained that my parents still had responsibilities until my birthday. A temporary caregiver authorization would allow Ruth to handle school matters and help if a medical emergency occurred. My parents would remain responsible for minimum support during those 5 weeks. Dad came to sign that afternoon. Mom arrived separately 10 minutes later. Nina placed the document between them and explained each line. I watched Dad for evidence that a night of sleep had changed him. "This ends when she turns 18?" he asked. "The authorization does," Nina said. "The relationship consequences do not come with an automatic date." Dad signed. Mom held the pen for several seconds before adding her name. She looked at me as if waiting for me to rescue her from the choice. I did not. Their signatures hurt more than the shouting. Anger could be impulsive. Ink applied in a quiet office was a decision made twice. The first weeks at the farm were a lesson in how suspicious safety can feel. Ruth gave me 3 household expectations: tell someone where I was going, keep up with school, and speak before a problem became an emergency. She did not ask me to prove gratitude. I tried anyway. I woke before dawn to enter invoices in the farm office, cleaned the cottage every night, and volunteered to sort supply receipts after school. One afternoon, Ruth found me standing at the copier with swollen ankles and a stack of purchase orders. "How many hours did you agree to work today?" she asked. 2. "And how many have you worked?" "Almost 4. She took the papers from me. "Shelter is not an hourly wage, Leah. Go put your feet up." The farm also corrected the fantasy that Gabe's job was simple. A pump failed. Fuel prices rose. A buyer delayed payment. Some weeks Gabe worked 6 days and still came home worried about numbers. His family owned land and equipment, but neither could be sliced into grocery money without consequences. One evening he came to the cottage carrying a small velvet box. He did not kneel. His hand shook too much. "Marry me when you turn 18, he said. "You and the baby can stay here permanently. I'll put you on my insurance. Nobody can say you don't have a family." Part of me wanted to say yes, simply because the offer sounded like a door locking safely behind me. That was why I could not. "Are you asking because you want a marriage," I said, "or because my parents made you feel responsible for replacing everything they took?" He looked down at the box. "I don't know if I can separate those things tonight." "Then tonight can't decide the rest of our lives." His disappointment was visible, but he closed the box. "Okay. You're not angry?" "I'm scared." "That's different." He sat beside me. "We'll keep making the plan. If you say yes someday, I want to know you were free to say no." For the first time since leaving home, disagreement did not cost me shelter, affection, or safety. That changed something in me no proposal could have changed by itself. I turned 18 on a wet November morning. Ruth put one candle in a stack of pancakes, Gabe gave me a pair of insulated boots, and Nina emailed confirmation that my accelerated course plan had been approved. The celebration was small, but nothing in it depended on me becoming someone different by evening. Dad sent a 2-line message reminding me that his offer still stood if I reconsidered the pregnancy. Mom sent a photograph of the cake she had apparently ordered before the argument. Beneath it, she wrote that things did not have to be this way. I stared at those words until Gabe asked whether I wanted him to take my phone. "No," I said. "I need to learn how to hold it without letting them decide what I do next." Finishing school became my next decision. Nina arranged evening modules and supervised study periods around prenatal appointments. I completed 2 final projects from the cottage table and sat my last exam in December. There was no auditorium ceremony yet, only an email confirming that I had satisfied my requirements and could participate with my class in June if I wanted. I read the message 3 times. "You did it," Gabe said. "I changed how I did it." That still counts. We kept talking about marriage, but the conversations became less romantic and more useful. We met with a counselor. We listed farm income at its worst, not its best. We calculated diapers, clinic bills, food, and the part-time community college program I hoped to start after the baby was older. The counselor asked Gabe what frightened him most. "That I'll fail them the way my dad's death made me feel failed," he said, then immediately looked ashamed. I know he didn't choose to die. I reached for his hand. His father had died when Gabe was 15, leaving him with a belief that every danger could be defeated by working harder. When the counselor asked me, I said, "I'm afraid help always becomes ownership. I'm afraid I'll wake up one day and realize I traded my father's rules for my husband's." Gabe did not defend himself. "Then we need rules that apply to both of us." We built them. Neither of us would make a major financial decision alone. My education would remain part of the budget. Childcare belonged to both parents. Ruth's assistance would be discussed, never assumed. Conflict would not be answered with threats to leave or threats to remove love. Ruth reviewed our numbers once, then slid the pages back across the kitchen table. She did not offer to erase the shortfall. Instead, she showed us where harvest income arrived unevenly and asked what would happen if the baby needed care during the busiest month. Gabe initially answered every question with another hour he could work. I finally stopped him. "A plan where you never sleep is not a plan," I said. He crossed out 2 imagined overtime shifts. That small act mattered. We were learning to build a life neither of us had to survive alone. In January, Gabe brought the velvet box back to the cottage. This time he set it on the table between our budget sheets. "I still want to marry you," he said. "Not because you need somewhere to live, not because of the baby. I want the life we've been planning, including the difficult parts." I opened the box. The ring was simple and slightly loose. "Then yes," I said, "because I want it too." We married 2 weeks later in a county courtroom. Ruth and Beatrice witnessed it. Beatrice was Gabe's grandmother, a reserved woman who had spent most of her life overseeing orchard operations and cooperative meetings. She hugged me once, firmly, then reminded us that marriage did not make a budget optional. Afterward, we ate lunch at the farm's long kitchen table. There were no flowers beyond a jar of clipped evergreen branches. Gabe wore a clean jacket over the same work shirt Dad would have dismissed. I wore a cream dress Ruth helped me alter around my stomach. My parents were absent. I had not invited them because they had never withdrawn the condition attached to my return. Their absence still hurt. Happiness did not erase it. The two emotions sat beside each other all afternoon. At one point, Ruth asked whether I wanted a photograph with an empty space left beside me in case I regretted not inviting them. I told her no. I did not want to manufacture their presence or pretend the choice had been mutual. We took the photograph with the people who had shown up, and I let the missing faces remain missing. Word of the marriage reached Mom through a relative. 3 days later, she asked to meet. Her message was longer than anything she had sent since I left. She said she could not bear the thought of her grandchild arriving while she had never met my husband. She did not apologize, but she admitted that silence was making the distance permanent. I showed the message to Gabe. "What do you want?" he asked, the same question he had asked outside the clinic. "One meeting. Somewhere public, no decisions about the future while we're there." "Then that's what we do." I told Mom that both parents had to come, Gabe would attend, and nobody would pressure us about money, the baby, or our marriage. She agreed immediately. That was how we arrived at the quiet restaurant from the beginning of my story. Dad examined Gabe's hands, ignored the apology he owed, and asked for his complete legal name. Gabe looked at me once more. I nodded. Then he answered, "Gabriel Thomas Arden." Dad's expression changed so slightly that another person might have missed it. His shoulders lowered. His eyes moved from Gabe's face to his hands and back again, as though the same details now produced a different calculation. "Arden?" he asked. "As in Arden Valley?" "My family operates there," Gabe said. Mom set down her cup. "The Orchard Cooperative?" Gabe nodded. I finally understood what Dad had recognized. The unnamed agricultural account consuming his attention for months was Arden Valley Growers Cooperative. Gabe's grandmother chaired its board. After his father's death, Gabe had inherited a minority interest in the family orchard and, when he became an adult, one voting position in the cooperative. Dad had read his complete name in the bank's preparation file. The document had contained no current photograph, and most meetings had involved Beatrice and the cooperative's professional advisors. Dad had known the name without knowing the 19-year-old sitting across from him. I remembered the folders Dad had carried through the house, the late calls about seasonal lending, and the morning he had complained that the cooperative's youngest voting member had not attended an introductory session. He had spoken about that absent member with professional respect. He had never imagined the same person was the boy he had reduced to dirt beneath his boots. "You're Thomas Arden's son," Dad said. "I am." Dad gave a short laugh that contained no humor. "Leah said you were a farmer." "I am a farmer." Gabe glanced at his hands. That part wasn't incomplete. The Ardens were respected in Cedar Ridge, but the truth was less glamorous than Dad's imagination. Gabe did not control a fortune. His share was tied to land, trees, equipment, and debt. He worked irrigation, repaired machinery, supervised crews, and worried when buyers paid late. He possessed one vote among many and could not award Dad's bank a contract. None of that mattered to Dad at first. The surname had already performed its miracle. His posture toward Gabe changed before his words did. The narrowed eyes and clipped questions disappeared. He began listening without interruption. That was the courtesy I had spent years earning through perfect grades, and Gabe received it in seconds through a name. The transformation gave me the vindication I thought I wanted, then hollowed it out from the inside. He signaled the waiter and ordered a better bottle of sparkling water, as though our table had changed categories. His questions softened. He asked Gabe about the orchard expansion, Beatrice's health, and the cooperative's review schedule. Gabe answered the personal question about his grandmother and ignored the business questions. Mom reached across the table toward me. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her open hand but did not take it. "You didn't ask. You could have explained who he was. I told you what he did. Dad said his name wouldn't change what he was." Dad shifted in his seat. We were operating with very limited information. You limited the information. You heard farmer and stopped listening. Mom's eyes moved to my stomach. For the first time since learning I was pregnant, she asked when the baby was due. Then she asked whether we had chosen a name, whether I had a doctor, whether we needed a crib. Each question was something I had once begged silently for her to care about. Receiving them now felt worse than receiving none at all. Dad spoke about holding a reception after the baby arrived. Mom offered to prepare my old room for visits. In 20 minutes, they moved from refusing to let my pregnancy exist beneath their roof to planning photographs with their grandchild. Mom even began discussing which relatives should hear the news first, as though the months of silence had been a private pause rather than an exile they had explained to everyone else. I realized they were not only welcoming us, they were drafting a version in which they had always expected things to turn out well. If his name were Gabriel Miller, I asked, and he worked the same hours, treated me the same way, and loved this baby exactly as much, would we be having this conversation? Mom's hand withdrew. Dad answered with the careful patience he used on clients. Circumstances matter. Stability matters. His circumstances haven't changed since the night you threw me out. Only your knowledge of his surname changed. Gabe kept his voice even. And for clarity, I won't discuss the bank's proposal in a family meeting. I have one vote. Any relationship affecting that vote has to be disclosed. Dad smiled too quickly. Of course. Nobody is asking for special treatment. I wanted to leave immediately, but part of me was still the girl who had watched Mom cry beside the stairs. I could not decide whether their sudden interest was entirely false or whether status had opened a door remorse might eventually walk through. I agreed to limited written contact. No unannounced visits, no business requests, no claim that we had reconciled. Mom accepted every condition. Dad proposed a private family dinner once we were ready. As Gabe helped me into my coat, Mom touched my sleeve. "I'm glad you're safe," she said. I believed she meant it. I also knew she had needed an Arden surname before allowing herself to say it. For the next 2 weeks, Mom sent one message each morning. She asked about prenatal appointments and shared recipes I had eaten as a child. Dad wrote less often. His messages focused on practical offers, better insurance, furniture for the cottage, a contribution toward a larger vehicle. Every offer required a conversation with him before acceptance. I declined them. When Mom invited us to dinner, I sent our conditions in writing. The evening would be private. Nobody from the bank or cooperative would attend. Gabe's work would not be discussed. My parents would not tell relatives that everything had been resolved. Dad replied that he understood. Mom promised it would be only the 4 of us. I read those messages again in the truck outside their house. "We can still leave," Gabe said. "If I don't test this, I'll keep imagining it could have been different." Then we test it. Mom opened the door before we reached it. She hugged me carefully, asking permission with her posture before touching my shoulders. It was the first small sign that she had heard anything I said. Then I saw the man's coat hanging beside Dad's in the entryway. "Who else is here?" I asked. Mom's smile faltered. "Your father's regional manager stopped by. It became late, so we invited him to eat. It isn't formal." Gabe looked at me. Leaving was still possible. Dad appeared from the dining room with his manager behind him, and the surprise on the manager's face told me he had not expected to find us there either. "Leah," Dad said warmly, "you remember my manager, and this must be Gabriel." He used Gabe's name as if presenting an achievement. I should have turned around. Instead, I stayed because I wanted to see whether Dad would respect the rest of the boundary after breaking the first part. That choice was mine, and I would later accept it as a mistake without confusing it with permission for what followed. Dinner began with ordinary questions. Mom asked about the baby. The manager congratulated us on the marriage. Dad described the cider as locally produced, then shifted toward the region's orchards, the cooperative's growth, and Ridge County Bank's commitment. He raised his glass and welcomed Gabe properly into the family. The word properly landed hard. Nothing about Gabe's treatment of me had become more honorable since our first meeting. Dad had simply discovered a reason to display him. Mom smiled through the toast, but she avoided my eyes. She knew this was not the private dinner she had promised, and for the moment she was choosing smoothness again. Gabe set down his fork. Dad continued, "Our families have only recently discovered how closely connected we may become. Gabriel's grandmother and I will likely be working together soon." "That hasn't been decided," Gabe said. The manager looked between them. "You know Mrs. Arden personally?" Dad smiled. "Gabriel is my son-in-law." His manager's eyebrows rose. Dad watched that reaction with unmistakable satisfaction. I understood then that the extra guest had not merely stayed because dinner ran late. Dad wanted someone above him to witness the connection before Gabe disclosed it through formal channels, where it would look like a conflict instead of an advantage. There it was. He offered the relationship as evidence of access while presenting himself as a welcoming father. Gabe's voice remained calm. "I have one cooperative vote. I cannot promise anyone's business, and I won't make a recommendation through a family relationship. I also need to disclose this connection and recuse myself from the bank review." Dad's jaw tightened. "There is no need to dramatize a family dinner. You invited your manager after agreeing there would be no bank discussion," I said. "He happened to be here. I am trying to bring the important parts of my life together." His manager looked uncomfortable. "Conrad, has this relationship been disclosed to compliance?" Dad reached for his water. "There was nothing to disclose until recently. My daughter had been living independently." "That's one way to say it," I said. Dad turned toward me with a warning in his eyes. "Leah, this is not the time." That warning was familiar. It meant the truth was permitted only when it protected him. His manager asked quietly, "Were you estranged?" Dad answered first. "We had a difficult disagreement about her choices. She left home, but Elaine and I always wanted the best for her." Mom stared at her plate. I felt Gabe's hand rest open on the table beside mine. He did not grip me or urge me forward. The choice remained mine. "My parents told me to terminate my pregnancy or leave," I said. I refused. They signed temporary caregiver papers the next day. Dad did not know Gabe's last name until 2 weeks ago. His attitude changed when he recognized the Arden account. I did not raise my voice. I did not repeat Dad's cruelest phrase or describe Mom watching me pack. The documented facts were enough. Saying less prevented him from dismissing the truth as a daughter's emotional performance. Silence moved through the room. Dad's manager looked at Mom. "Is that accurate?" Mom's lips parted. I watched her search for a version that would protect everyone. "It was a terrible night," she said. "We were frightened." "That isn't an answer," I told her. She looked at me then. "Yes, we gave her that choice." Dad pushed back from the table. "You are making a private family crisis sound like professional misconduct." "No," his manager said. "The family history is private. Using an undisclosed family relationship to imply influence over a prospective client is professional." Dad's face lost color. Gabe stood and helped me with my chair. Mom whispered my name, but I had already given that room more truth than it deserved. At the door, Dad said, "If you walk out now, don't expect me to clean up what you've done." I looked at the key he had once taken from my hand, still hanging on the family hook. "This time," I said, "the consequences belong to you." Then Gabe and I left together. Dad called before we reached the farm. I let the first call end. He called again, then Mom did. On the third attempt, I answered and placed the phone on speaker. "Do you have any idea what you may have cost me?" Dad demanded. "You invited your manager. You brought up the cooperative. You misrepresented our relationship." "I was trying to welcome your husband into this family." Gabe kept his eyes on the road. "You were trying to turn him into a reference," I said. Mom took the phone. "Leah, whatever your father intended, correcting him in front of his manager was unnecessary. You could call tomorrow and explain that emotions were high." The request hurt because it showed how quickly she could return to translating his choices into my responsibility. Everything I said was true. Truth can still be used cruelly. So can silence. I ended the call. The next morning, Gabe met with Beatrice and the cooperative's outside advisor. He disclosed our marriage, my relationship to Conrad, and everything Dad had said at dinner. Then he recused himself from all discussion and voting concerning Ridge County Bank. Grandma didn't threaten anyone, he told me afterward. She said the process would continue without me. Ridge County Bank's compliance department reached the same conclusion from the other direction. Dad was removed from the proposal team while the undisclosed conflict was reviewed. His regional manager postponed the promotion decision, not because Dad had an estranged pregnant daughter, but because he had created the appearance of private access after promising a professional evaluation. The cooperative considered the bank's proposal without Dad or Gabe. Another institution offered stronger governance protections and more flexible seasonal terms. The board selected it. Beatrice showed us the written evaluation only after the decision became official. Ridge County Bank had remained competitive, but it ranked second on repayment flexibility during poor harvests and on protections for member farms. Dad's conduct had removed him from the pitch. It had not determined the board's scoring. That distinction mattered to Gabe, who refused to let personal justice contaminate a process affecting dozens of families. Dad blamed Gabe anyway. He sent me an email accusing the Ardens of punishing him through business. Gabe forwarded the cooperative's formal explanation, which listed the financial reasons and documented his recusal. Dad never acknowledged it. Facts had always mattered to him most when they supported the result he wanted. By then, I was close to giving birth. My back ached, sleep arrived in short pieces, and every phone vibration made my body tense. Gabe responded by working longer hours, as if enough repaired equipment and completed paperwork could build a wall around us. One night, I found him asleep at the cottage table beside a list of hospital expenses. "You can't keep doing this," I said. He woke and rubbed his face. "Doing what?" "Trying to outrun every problem before it reaches me." "I'm supposed to take care of you. You're supposed to be with me. That's not the same thing." His eyes filled before he looked away. "I'm terrified." It was the first time he had said it without following the admission with a plan. "Me too," I said. We sat at the little table and made one more list, not of expenses but of people we trusted. Ruth would drive if labor began while Gabe was in the far orchard. Nina could help with school records. Beatrice would handle farm decisions. My parents would be notified after the birth, but they would not be on the hospital visitor list. Labor began before dawn on a cold March morning. There was no dramatic roadside emergency. Ruth drove us to the regional hospital while Gabe timed contractions badly and apologized every time he lost count. The hours that followed were exhausting, painful, and ordinary in the way life-changing events often are. Gabe stayed beside me. Ruth waited until I asked for her. Nurses moved in and out. At one point, I said I could not continue, and nobody answered with an empty promise. They reminded me that I was already continuing, one breath at a time. Between contractions, I found myself asking whether Mom had experienced the same fear when I was born. The thought did not soften what she had done, but it complicated my anger. Becoming a mother did not make me understand her ultimatum. It made me understand more clearly that love and fear can occupy the same body, and that fear still does not absolve the choices made in love's name. Nora was born just after sunset. When the nurse placed her against me, she was warm, furious, and real. I looked at her small face and remembered Dad calling her cheap before he knew anything except that her father worked the soil. There was no price attached to what I felt. Gabe bent over us, crying openly. "Hi, Nora! I'm your dad!" We notified my parents the next morning. Mom replied within a minute, asking which hospital and whether she could come immediately. When I reminded her that we were not receiving visitors, she wrote that keeping a grandmother away would only create more pain. Dad's message arrived later. He said he regretted how harshly his concern had been expressed and hoped we could all stop punishing one another. Neither message named what they had done. Both treated access to Nora as the cure for harm they had not acknowledged. I felt guilty anyway. New motherhood had made every protective decision feel enormous. Denying a visit seemed harsh when I pictured Mom crying, but allowing one would teach both parents that Nora could be used to bypass me. Gabe did not tell me what to choose. He reminded me that boundaries could change after evidence changed, but they did not have to change because someone disliked them. I answered once, Nora was healthy, I was recovering, and we would contact them if our boundaries changed. Then I muted the conversation and held my daughter while morning light entered the hospital room. During Nora's first months, Dad tried to repair the distance with money. A crib arrived with a note asking me to call. He offered to restore my education fund if we attended Sunday dinner twice a month. When I declined, he accused Gabe of keeping me dependent on the Ardens. We returned the crib. I told Dad my education was not a payment he could release in exchange for family access. Mom's first attempts were not much better. She sent long messages about missing my childhood and losing Nora's earliest days. Then, for almost a month, she stopped asking me to comfort her. Her next letter was different. She wrote that Dad had issued the ultimatum, but she had chosen to support it. She admitted she had followed me upstairs and watched me pack because opposing him felt more frightening than abandoning me. She acknowledged that Gabriel's surname had made reconciliation feel socially safe, proving that her acceptance had been conditional too. There was no request at the end. Mom began seeing a counselor. I did not treat that as proof by itself. What mattered was what followed. She corrected the story she and Dad had told relatives. She returned the remaining documents and possessions from my room without requiring a meeting. When she sent messages, she asked whether contact was welcome and accepted silence when it was not. Dad called her confession disloyal. Their marriage became strained, but Mom did not use that strain to demand that I reward her. For the first time, she allowed discomfort to remain with the person responsible for it. Life at the farm did not become easy because I had married an Arden. A late frost damaged part of the pear crop. Repairs consumed the reserve Ruth had hoped to use on the cottage. Gabe and I delayed buying a larger vehicle and rearranged childcare around harvest. I began part-time community college classes in accounting and agricultural business. I contributed to the farm office, but nobody told me I had to save the operation to justify belonging there. Some evenings I studied while Nora slept against Gabe's chest. Other evenings nothing was accomplished except feeding her, washing bottles, and getting through the day without turning exhaustion against each other. Nearly a year after I left home, I agreed to let Mom meet Nora at the cottage. Ruth remained nearby, and Gabe followed my lead. Mom arrived without gifts. She stood inside the doorway until I invited her farther. "May I hold her?" she asked. I studied her face. The longing was real, but longing alone had once made her dangerous because she believed it entitled her to control the outcome. "You may sit with her while I'm here." She nodded. "Thank you." The visit lasted 20 minutes. Mom cried when Nora grasped her finger, but she did not ask when she could return. Before leaving, she told me she understood that one visit did not restore a relationship. It was not forgiveness completed or a family healed. It was one honest experience placed beside months of honest conduct. For now, that was enough. Dad remained outside our active lives. His letters still explained his intentions, his childhood fear of poverty, and the pressure he had been under. They did not accept that fear explained his behavior without excusing it. I stopped answering explanations disguised as apologies. The following spring, I drove home from class with my blue travel bag on the passenger seat. It held 2 accounting textbooks, a notebook filled with formulas, and a package of crackers Nora had crushed during the morning drive. My cottage key hung from the ignition ring. Behind the cottage, Gabe and Ruth were waiting near the first open space in a new orchard row. Nora sat on a shaded blanket, beating a wooden spoon against an overturned bowl. Beside her lay a young apple tree with its roots wrapped in damp cloth. We had chosen the tree after Nora was born, but Beatrice insisted we wait for the right planting season. Young roots, she said, did not become stronger because adults were impatient. Gabe dug while I loosened the wrapping. Ruth steadied the trunk. We lowered it together, spread the roots, and returned soil to the hole a little at a time. Nobody pretended planting guaranteed survival. The tree would require water, pruning, protection from frost, and years of ordinary attention. When we finished, Gabe fastened a small metal tag to the support stake. It carried only the date. No prestigious surname, no claim of ownership over what the tree might become. I lifted Nora from the blanket and looked toward the cottage. The brass key in my pocket opened a home where disagreement did not end belonging. The blue bag by the door no longer held the possessions I had rescued from my childhood. It carried the education my parents said I had destroyed. For most of my life, I thought home was the place where the most powerful person allowed you to stay. Watching Gabe press the final soil around that young tree, I understood something different. Home was the place where love survived truth, responsibility, disagreement, and time.